Lynn Bernstein is an election integrity advocate, but unlike most of the people we've heard talking about election security in the past 2 years, Lynn Bernstein is a Democrat. I caught up with Bernstein at a protest she organized outside the Wake County Board of Elections on election night. You're going to hear about why Bernstein is protesting in Wake County, as well as how she got into election integrity, how the local media coverage of the subject has changed, and, perhaps most importantly, a civil rights case Bernstein is bringing against the Wake County election manager after she was trespassed from Wake County Board of Elections property and prevented from participating in observation or participation in public comment at meetings held at the board headquarters. If you'd like to support my independent journalism, the best thing you can do is like, share, subscribe, or leave a comment here or on your preferred platform. Let's get into it.
My name is Lynn Bernstein, and I founded Transparent Elections North Carolina back in 2019. We are a volunteer organization, and we try to work with elections officials to make elections that are trustworthy. So we want elections that are transparent and trackable and publicly verified with robust audits. And so we train members of the public to observe in a peaceful and civil and legal way, and we're trying to teach as many people as we can about the election process to demystify it and hopefully to have people have more confidence in the elections. The more that they understand and know about elections, that does help build people's confidence in elections. Yeah, so back in 2016 I had quite a few people asking me if I thought the election was legitimate or not. And at that time, I had never really looked at elections before, and I said, of course, I'm sure they're fine. This is America. I'm sure people are checking everything. And so some people found out that I used to do test engineering on satellite systems. And so they said, well, could you at least check and see how well these systems are tested? And so I spent several weeks pouring through all of the data and all of the test reports that I could find. And what I found was it wasn't really tested as robustly as I would have liked to have seen. Right. Yeah, so in 2020, I came here to the Wake Board of Elections to their absentee meeting where they were approving and opening and scanning ballots. And I noticed that the process they were using was not what I was seeing in the law. What they were doing for the 2020 primary was they were pre-opening the ballots, the absentee ballots, I think out of convenience, I was told. And then they would remove the ballots from the envelopes, but rather than scanning them right away at that same meeting, they would recess the meeting to the next week and scan them then. And so it was sort of this recess loophole. And so from the time of the 2020 primary to the 2020 general election, I pretty much ran it up every flagpole and tried to force Wake to comply with the law. And so finally, eventually, the state board, about a week before we were supposed to be scanning absentee ballots for the 2020 general election, the state board issued a directive telling the counties, you may not continue opening ballots and holding them. You have to scan them right away in front of the public. And so Wake and several other counties had this practice that they were doing, and they had been doing it for years. And so for the 2020 election was the first time where that processing stopped in that way. And so starting in 2020 for the 2020 general election, the absentee ballot processing was done more securely starting then. Right, even during 2020, there was an article that came out. It was written, I believe it was News and Observer, and they put out an article essentially saying that the absentee ballots were opened and scanned at the same meeting. And so I called the journalist and I said, hey, I'm not sure if you're aware, but that's not actually what's happening. And he said, oh yeah, I know that they're doing it this other way, but we don't want to scare people. And I have a real problem with that, because the whole point of the article was to inform the public on what happens to your ballot once you send it in if you do an absentee ballot. And so I pushed on them and said, this is really disingenuous and it's misleading to the public. And if your goal is to tell people what happens to their ballots, I don't think that people would stand for this. And so they did change the article to put an S after meeting to say meetings to make it completely legal. But it seems like prior to the 2020 election, journalists were willing to sort of highlight things that needed improving in our election. And it seems like after 2020, I think for fear that we're gonna give, fuel to the Stop the Steal people or to somebody who wants to overturn an election, they've decided, I think the media collectively has decided not to publish anything that might put any doubt in anyone's mind that the elections are anything but perfect. And although our elections, there are a lot of great things about them, there are things that need improving, and there are processes that need improving, and we definitely need independent external audits. Yeah, so tonight we're out here because according to the state board, all members of each county board have to be present for the canvass of the election. And what a canvass is, a lot of people think that canvass is a single day, 10 days after the election, where the local boards of elections look at all the information and then they certify the election. But the canvass actually is a process that starts 5 weeks before the election, when we start opening absentee ballots and scanning those. And so tonight what's happening is part of the canvass. Precincts are done voting for the evening. The poll workers are bringing back the ballots, and they're bringing back these media sticks, these data sticks that have our vote totals on them. And they bring them here to the Board of Elections, just like they do in every other county. And those media sticks with the vote totals get uploaded into the election system at the county, and then that goes on to the state, and then people can, who are at home, can go to the state board website and get those results. Well, uploading of those media sticks, that data that's on that sticks, that has to be per the state board is saying that process has to be supervised by all members of the board. And even if a member of the board can't be here, they're supposed to at least be here remotely. So what's happening here is that back for the 2020 primary, I came up here for the 2020 primary not understanding that the Board of Elections building in Wake County is closed to the public on election night. And so I inquired, and I had found out that there were 3 members of the public, 3 members of the board who were here that night, which is a quorum. And anytime there's a quorum, they have to call a meeting and then let the public in. And so I asked them, well, why wouldn't they let me in when there was a quorum inside? And one of the members said that they weren't conducting board business. And I think what she meant was that they weren't voting on anything, therefore they didn't have to call a meeting. And I said, well, but you're a member of the board and you're at the Board of Elections on election night. That's a pretty tough sell to tell people that you're not conducting board business. Are you just here as a member of the public then? And they said, well, yeah. I guess in a way we're here as members of the public. So I said, okay, well, I'm a member of the public too. So I'd like to come in. And they essentially said no. And so every election since then, they've only had 2 members of the board present here on election night. They've had 1 Republican and 1 Democrat that supervise that process, but the state board's directive says that all 5 members have to be present for that. So the board isn't supervising, the board isn't providing the oversight that they're supposed to. The public isn't allowed to see anything, so there's no public oversight. And so we're out here saying that our voters' rights include oversight. Right. So on election night at Wake Board of Elections, no one is allowed inside. We're supposed to be allowed inside, but we're not. But even for just meetings now, I have been trespassed from the Wake Board of Elections property. And what that means is that if I ever go on this property again, or property of Wake County Board of Elections property, that I will be arrested and charged with criminal trespass. And unfortunately, this all came about back in May, when myself and another advocate, we came up here on a Saturday afternoon, just trying to scope out a place to hold the protest that we held in May, and then of course this protest tonight. And so we didn't want to park on the Board of Elections property because there was all sorts of stuff going on, and we didn't want to interfere with any process. So we parked at an adjacent property, and the director had security guard who was here call the police on us because they said we looked suspicious and that they had problems with me before. Although I've never heard of any problems. I asked the state said they've never heard of any problems. And so I'm not really sure what he was talking about then, but eventually the police did come. We were walking and looking for signs, looking for, places where people could park or not park. And so the police showed up and they said, well, the election director wants you trespassed, and so I have to write this form. Even though you didn't commit a crime, you didn't do anything, if he wants me to write this form, I have to write this form. And so the Raleigh police officer wrote the form as if this was a private property and not public property. So now, because there's no due process for that, I've had to file a lawsuit in federal court to get my rights restored. Because right now I'm not allowed to go to public meetings. I'm not allowed to give public comment at those meetings. Obviously, I'm not allowed in the building. There are a lot of restrictions, a lot of rights that have been taken away from me because I look suspicious. I'm not really, it just makes no sense whatsoever. What we were doing here that day was perfectly legal. We had every right to walk along the right of way. We had every right to even go into the parking lot because there were signs posted saying Board of Elections event. And so anytime there's a Board of Elections event, that means the public is allowed. And so although we didn't know what the event was at the time, we weren't really prohibited from being here. And the crazy part is that I never even went past the fence line. I stayed on the outside of the fence the entire time. And so, it seems that they were just looking for a reason to prevent me from observing and prevent me from giving public comment. Well, Monday we're having the case heard in federal court on Monday, and so I'm really hoping that I get my rights back so that I can be here for that final day of canvass 10 days after the election, so that I can observe at least part of the election processes for this 2022 election.